My daughter emptied my bank account and sold my house for her wedding, then she found out I was. I remember the exact moment my world tilted. It wasn't when the bank called. It wasn't when I saw the zero balance. It was when my daughter looked me in the eyes and said, "Dad, you trust me, right?" Trust. That word used to mean everything between us. My name is Daniel, and for 32 years, being a father has been the one thing I was certain I did right. After my wife, Lillian, passed away when our daughter Ava was just 6, it was the two of us against the world. I learned how to braid hair from YouTube videos. I burned countless pancakes on Sunday mornings before finally getting them right. I sat in the front row of every school recital, even when she insisted she only had one tiny line. Ava was my light, and I was her safe place. Or at least, I thought I was. Growing up, she used to slip little handwritten notes under my bedroom door. "You're the best dad ever. Don't work too hard. When I get married, you'll walk me down the aisle, okay?" I kept every single one in a wooden box in my closet. So when she got engaged last year, I felt something close to pride and grief all at once. Pride, because she had grown into this intelligent, graceful woman with her mother's smile. Grief, because I knew I was about to let go of the last piece of the little girl who used to fall asleep on my chest during thunderstorms. Her fiancé, Marcus, seemed fine. That's the word I kept using. Fine, polite, well-dressed, always saying the right thing. He worked in finance, talked confidently about investments and market timing, and carried himself with a kind of effortless charm. Ava adored him. I could see it in the way she leaned toward him when he spoke, the way she laughed a little too brightly at his jokes. He called me, "Sir," for the first few months. Then, "Dad." That should have warmed me. Instead, something about it felt rehearsed. But I pushed the thought away. I told myself I was just being protective. That's what fathers do. When they announced they wanted a small but elegant wedding, I offered to help financially. It wasn't even a question in my mind. I had spent decades saving, not for vacations, not for luxuries, but for her. For college. For her future. For this moment. "I don't want you to stress about money," I told her one evening while we sat at the kitchen table. The same table where she had done her homework, where we had celebrated birthdays with store-bought cakes and candles that leaned sideways. She reached across and squeezed my hand. "You've done enough, Dad." I should have noticed the way Marcus stayed quiet during that conversation. Watching. Calculating. The requests started small. A venue deposit here. Catering advance there. Ava would call me late at night, her voice soft and slightly anxious. "Dad, the florist needs confirmation tomorrow or we lose the date." Or, "Marcus found a better photographer, but we have to pay up front." Each time, I transferred the money without hesitation. It felt good, in a way. To be needed again. One afternoon, Ava came over alone. She looked tired but determined. "Dad," she began, carefully, "Marcus thinks it would make more sense if we consolidated the wedding funds into one account. Just temporarily. For easier tracking." I blinked. "Consolidated?" "Yeah. Instead of you sending separate transfers, we could move the amount you're planning to contribute into a joint account for the wedding. It'll help us manage everything transparently." Transparently. I remember staring at her, searching her face for any sign of doubt. All I saw was trust. My little girl asking me to believe in her. "How much are we talking about?" I asked gently. She hesitated. Just for a second. "Well, we calculated everything. The venue upgrade, the guest list expansion, the honeymoon package. Around 200,000. 200,000. It was more than I expected. More than we had ever discussed. But I had the savings. Years of careful planning. Some investments that had matured. And the house had appreciated significantly in value. "Is this what you really want?" I asked. She smiled. "It's once in a lifetime, Dad." I nodded. The paperwork was surprisingly quick. Marcus recommended a financial advisor, someone he trusted. We sat in a bright office with floor-to-ceiling windows, signing documents that blurred together. Temporary transfers. Asset adjustments. Strategic liquidity management. So many polished words. At one point, the advisor glanced at me and said, "You're very generous, Mr. Carter." I looked at Ava. "She's my daughter." That should have been the end of it. But weeks later, I received a letter. Not an email. A formal letter. It stated that my primary savings account had been fully transferred. I frowned, confused. I had authorized a significant amount, yes, but not everything. I called the bank. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Mr. Carter, the representative said carefully, the transfers were executed under the joint authorization you signed. Joint authorization. My chest tightened. That evening, I asked Ava to come over. She arrived with Marcus. She looked nervous. He looked calm. I got a notice from the bank, I began slowly. It says the account is empty. Marcus leaned forward immediately. Right. About that, we decided it would be smarter to move all the funds temporarily into a higher yield structure tied to the wedding trust. Wedding trust. I looked at Ava. You knew about this. She swallowed. Marcus said it would grow the money before final payments are due. And the house? I asked quietly. There it was. The flicker in her eyes. The house, she repeated. I got an appraisal request confirmation in my email. And a preliminary sales consultation document. Silence. Marcus cleared his throat. We were going to talk to you about that. The room felt smaller. The walls closer. Ava. My voice cracked despite my effort to stay steady. She stood up and began pacing. Dad, listen. The market is perfect right now. You've always said this house is too big for you. We thought, if we sell it, we can free up capital. You could move somewhere smaller. Closer to us. We thought. My hands trembled slightly, but I folded them together to hide it. You're selling my house? I asked. No, she said quickly. Not selling. Just planning. Exploring options. Marcus's jaw tightened, just briefly. Everything would be legally structured. You'd be taken care of. Taken care of. As if I were a liability to be managed. I looked around the kitchen. The scratch on the cabinet from when Ava learned to ride her bike indoors. The faint pencil marks on the wall we never painted over, tracking her height year after year. Memories don't transfer into higher yield structures. Ava, I said softly, why didn't you tell me? She stopped pacing. Her eyes glistened, but I couldn't tell if it was guilt or frustration. We didn't want you to overthink it. Overthink it. That night, after they left, I sat alone in the dark living room. No lights. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of cars passing. I opened the wooden box in my closet and read one of her old notes. When I get married, you'll walk me down the aisle, okay? I pressed the paper to my chest. And then my phone buzzed. A notification from the bank. Final confirmation. Property sale listing activated. My house was officially on the market. But what Ava, and Marcus, didn't know, was that 3 months ago, after a quiet conversation with an old colleague, I had made a decision of my own. A decision that would change everything. And when my daughter finally discovered who I truly was, she would realize the wedding wasn't the only thing being planned. My daughter emptied my bank account and sold my house for her wedding, then she found out I was. The night I saw my house listed online, something inside me didn't shatter. It settled. A strange, heavy calm replaced the panic I thought I would feel. I stared at the photos, my living room staged with borrowed furniture, my kitchen digitally brightened, my bedroom described as spacious with sentimental charm. Sentimental charm. They had reduced 32 years of memories to a selling point. But here's what Ava didn't know. 3 months earlier, before the wedding planning escalated, before the transfers and the strategic liquidity, I had quietly reconnected with an old colleague from my past life, a life I rarely talked about. Before I became just Dad, I was Daniel Carter, Senior Compliance Director for one of the largest financial oversight firms in the state. My entire career had been built around reviewing contracts, identifying irregularities, and detecting subtle manipulations buried inside polished language. I had spent decades teaching corporations how not to get sued. And apparently, my future son-in-law had underestimated that. The first time Marcus mentioned a wedding trust, something in my mind had flickered. Not suspicion exactly, more like professional reflex. So I did what I had always done. I read everything. Not quickly. Not emotionally. Clinically. Every document I had signed, every clause in the joint authorization, every addendum the advisor had slid across the desk with a reassuring smile. That's when I noticed it. The structure wasn't temporary. The joint account wasn't limited to wedding expenses. And the property consultation paperwork. It had been drafted with pre-authorization language embedded, language that would allow a majority stakeholder to initiate listing actions without secondary consent once certain thresholds were met. Thresholds tied to shared financial restructuring. It was clever. Very clever. And it might have worked. If I had still been the exhausted, grieving widower who signed documents without reading the footnotes. But I wasn't. The day after the listing went live, I made a phone call. Not to Ava. To the bank's executive compliance department. By noon, a review had been initiated. By evening, temporary holds were placed. Not visible holds. Internal ones. I didn't want a scene. I wanted clarity. 2 days later, I invited Ava to lunch. Alone. She arrived looking distracted, her phone buzzing every few minutes. Wedding vendors. Seating charts. Marcus. You look tired, I said gently. She forced a smile. It's just stress. It'll be worth it. I studied her face. The same face that once lit up when I brought home a surprise ice cream cone. The same eyes that searched for me in crowded auditoriums. Ava, I asked quietly, are you happy? She blinked. Of course I am. That wasn't what I asked. Silence stretched between us. Her fingers tightened around her coffee cup. Marcus has a plan for our future, Dad. He's ambitious. He thinks big. And what do you think? She hesitated. That hesitation told me more than any confession could have. That evening, Marcus called me directly for the first time. His tone was controlled, polite, but strained. Mr. Carter, we've noticed some delays with the account transfers. I'm reviewing everything, I replied calmly. There's no need for concern, he said quickly. All actions were authorized. Yes, I agreed. Authorized under representations that are currently being evaluated. A pause. I'm not sure what that means. It means, I said evenly, that financial structures built on incomplete disclosure tend to collapse under scrutiny. His politeness thinned. Are you accusing me of something? No, I said. I'm observing. The next morning, Ava showed up at my door, eyes red. Marcus says you're trying to sabotage the wedding. The word hit harder than I expected. Is that what you think? I asked. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked into the living room and looked around, really looked around, as if seeing it for the first time since the listing. They said you'd be protected, she whispered. That downsizing would be good for you. That the investments would grow and we'd all benefit. They, I repeated gently. She sank onto the couch. Marcus and his advisor. I sat across from her. Ava, when you were little and wanted to cross the street alone, what did I tell you? She frowned slightly. Look both ways. And if a car was coming too fast. Wait. I nodded. You didn't wait. Her composure cracked then, not dramatically, not theatrically. Just a quiet unraveling. I thought this is what grown-ups do. They leverage assets. They build equity. Marcus said love means building something powerful together. Love, I said softly, doesn't rush signatures. She covered her face with her hands. I didn't tell her everything that day. I didn't tell her that the compliance review had already flagged inconsistencies in the advisor's disclosures. I didn't tell her that the majority stakeholder clause Marcus believed gave him control was now under formal legal examination due to procedural irregularities. And I definitely didn't tell her that 3 months ago, when I sensed a shift in tone around money, I had transferred the true core of my assets into a protected trust solely under my name, untouchable without my direct, in-person authorization. The account they emptied. It was substantial, but it wasn't everything. I had learned long ago that security isn't about what you show. It's about what you safeguard quietly. 2 days before the wedding, Marcus came to see me. Alone. His confidence was gone, replaced with urgency. The bank froze the trust, he said flatly. The property sale is suspended. Vendors are asking questions. Yes, I replied. You didn't have to escalate this. I didn't escalate, I said calmly. I verified. He ran a hand through his hair. This will humiliate Ava. No, I said evenly. The truth rarely humiliates the innocent. He stared at me then, really seeing me for the first time. You planned this. No, I corrected. I prepared. He left without another word. That night, Ava called me. Her voice was steadier than I expected. I ended it, she said. I closed my eyes briefly. Are you sure? I asked him questions, Dad. Real questions. About the clauses. About why everything had to be rushed. He said I was being influenced. And I realized I was. The wedding was cancelled quietly. Deposits were negotiated. Contracts reviewed. The compliance investigation into the advisor expanded beyond just our case. Marcus stopped calling. Weeks passed. The house listing was removed. One evening, Ava sat beside me on the back porch, watching the sunset bleed into the sky. "I'm sorry," she said. I didn't rush to respond. "Why?" I asked gently. "For confusing ambition with love. For thinking you were outdated. For believing that protecting yourself meant you didn't trust me." I looked at her, not as the little girl with handwritten notes, but as a woman who had stumbled and learned. "I trust you," I said. "I just don't outsource my judgment." She laughed softly through her tears. After a moment, she leaned her head on my shoulder like she used to during thunderstorms. "Dad, yes, when I do get married one day." I smiled faintly. "You'll walk me down the aisle," she finished. This time, there were no contracts. No advisors. No polished language. Just a father and his daughter, rebuilding something far more valuable than a wedding. Trust. And this time, we were both looking both ways.